How's it going, everybody? Back again today with a game analysis from a game I played earlier. It was a longer game I played. I've talked about this before. I played it on the Chess Free app. Had it set to the level 10 setting, which is supposedly around 1915 in terms of playing strength. Produces a pretty good game, and most importantly, as I've talked about before, it allows me to play a longer game, something that is relatively hard to do when playing online. So I set it at 60 minutes with a 10-second increment, and I get some pretty good games out of it. The game that I played today, I think, was really instructive, so I want to go ahead and share it with you guys. So I had the black pieces, and we started out, white played d4, I played knight f6, c4, e6, knight to f3, b6. We're in a Queen's Indian here. G3, I played the main line, bishop a6. Queen c2, defending c4, and allowing their bishop to fianchetto. Bishop e7, bishop g2, castling, bishop b7. This looks like a weird move, but this is totally playable and recurs in a lot of lines. In the Queen's Indian, initially the black will bring their bishop out to a6, pressurizing c4, but sometimes white can adequately defend against that threat, and it turns out that the bishop is better on b7, opposing, especially when white is fianchettoed their bishop, opposing white's bishop and not allowing any weird tactics along the h1 a8 diagonal. So knight bd2, d5. Oftentimes in the Queen's Indian, play centers around this the e4 square, so I'm trying to stop white from breaking with the e4 here. White takes on d5, I recapture, and then they jump in with knight e5. So up until this point, the opening has gone, I would say, pretty okay for me. So there were a couple points where I was sort of out of sync with theoretical move orders, but more or less we're following general development within the Queen's Indian so far. And the point that I want to make is that I got most of my sort of more than adequate opening play here by knowing a few moves in the opening, following general plans within the opening that I was aware of. Again, this, for example, this idea of trying to control e4 and stopping white breaking with the e4 pawn, or breaking with e2, e4. And then just sort of following general opening principles. So specifically here, this play that I've executed here over the first 10 moves or so, it's not something that I'm getting out of having memorized like 15 moves deep, in like 15 different lines in the Queen's Indian defense. Again, instead, I'm following general plans, good opening principles, things of that nature. And up until this point, it's been more than adequate, as I've got pretty much an equal position at this point. And here, we're sort of entering the early middle game. And the question I think a lot of us have when we get into the middle game is, okay, I've got a decent setup. What do I do now? So in this situation, I was annoyed with white's knight on e5, so I wanted to do something about it. So I played knight fd7. As it turns out, this isn't a bad move, but there were some slightly better options, which I think sort of highlight this idea of being okay with annoyances that might be in your position if it's possible for you to work around them. So possible slightly better alternatives here would have been something like knight a6, c5, which is a classic move in the Queen's Indian, and rook e8, all three of which should have led to pretty equal positions. Knight fd7 maybe gives white a bit of an advantage, but again, it's nothing crucial. After this, White played this weird move, knight to b1. I assume they're trying to regroup to c3 or something like this. I'm not really sure. This was a really odd move. All of their play up till this point had made sense, but yeah, this was kind of odd. However, the computer doesn't think, the engine doesn't think that it's a horrible move or anything. So even though it looks kind of weird to our human eyes, actually turns out to not be that bad. Maybe a small inaccuracy at the best. So I go ahead with my plan here and get rid of white's best piece. They recapture, and then I develop with knight d7, gaining a tempo on their pawn. So they develop and defend their pawn. Now, on the whole, everything again has gone fine up until this point, and it turns out that I actually have a pretty nice advantage here as we're sort of starting off the middle game. But the thing is, I've got to execute well now to realize that advantage. And here, the best move, if you want to go ahead and pause your video, would have been to go with g5. This was a move that never really occurred to me due to, I think, a mental blockage that many people probably would have in a similar situation of not wanting to move a pawn in front of our king, especially the g pawn in this case, and moving it forward to g5. It seems really weakening, and yeah, just not the thing that's sort of bouncing around in my head in this sort of position. But as it turns out, black just wins a pawn in this variation. So we get rid of the defender of the e5 pawn. We can take. White can, try to irritate us a bit. We'll just trade pawns, bishop c5. And here, black is just simply up a pawn. So this is my first big mistake, I would say, in the game. This move, I'm seeing this bishop that white has here. I know it's connected to the defense of the e-pawn, and my general thinking was, hey, if I can trade this off, I'll have a couple of attackers on the e-pawn. I can exert some pressure, and we'll sort of see what happens. But yeah, I had much better play here. And yeah, it's about executing in the middle game. So this was pretty much an only move. Like all other moves, I think, were significantly worse than this move g5. And I just needed to find that. So in any case, I played bishop g5 instead. White captured, I recaptured. And now in this position, white played queen takes c7. Now I will say, while the Queen's Indian is in my repertoire, it's definitely an opening that I'm focusing on. When this move appeared on the board, it did take me by surprise a little bit because I'm not used to a lot of the structures that you get in the Queen's Indian. And again, a lot of times the c-pawn for black can be kind of irritating or kind of a liability I've noticed in different games that I've went over and different lines that I've looked at, because things like this can happen. It can just be play might sort of the two armies might be starting to trade pieces off, and black might not have executed c5 yet. The c-pawn can be weak as it was here. So this just looks like, hey, I've lost a pawn. But even though I didn't notice this move initially, for whatever reason, it's actually kind of a mistake by black. And the reason for that is that they kind of get their queen trapped in my territory. So they grab a pawn, but they get their queen trapped in my territory, and they have to waste a lot of tempi to try to extract themselves from the situation. It's kind of like in the London or in other openings where you'll see a queen come out to like the B or the G file and take the opponent's B or G pawn that's not developed. Oftentimes those are referred to as poisoned pawn variations, and basically what happens is The player who is taking the pawn, sure, they go up a pawn, but they end up wasting a lot of moves to get that pawn, and that's sort of what happened in the subsequent moves that are coming up here to white. So we'll see that. So they play queen takes c7, and the best move, I think, by a significant margin, is this move knight c5, which defends against white's double attack on both my minor pieces, and more importantly, it kind of seals off escape routes for the queen. And then white played this sort of innocuous looking move, e3, and it turns out this was a pretty significant mistake. They needed to do something like knight c3, rook a8, protecting the d pawn, which is now twice attacked. It turns out the computer says they need to just jettison this pawn. It's too much of a weakness. e6, f takes e6, knight b5, looking at a7, rook f7, going after the queen, f4, counterattacking my queen, trading queens, getting the rook out of the attack from the knight, and knight takes on a7. So in this position, white has won a pawn, but black has some compensation because white's knight is awkwardly placed, and their extra pawn here is a doubled pawn on the g file. So in this situation, white's got an advantage, but it's definitely not something that's bad for black. But instead of going for this move knight c3, something like it would have been better for black, or sorry, better for white. White went for this move e3, and at this point I've got a pretty decent advantage that I just need to execute on. And my thinking here basically shifted to, how do I trap this queen? And this is a mindset that I was in for the next 4, 5, 6 moves. So I played rook a c8, the best move in the position. Just going after the queen and sort of asking where it's going to go. White responds by counterattacking my queen. I could have went to a couple places here. I chose queen g6, which was totally fine. White gets their queen out of the attack and tries to get on this dark square diagonal that they have a lot of access points on with their pawns, which is definitely the smart thing to do. And then, like I said, I'm sort of in this mindset of I need to figure out how to trap this queen. So I sort of sat on this move in the previous move for a while, like I mean a good amount of time. Maybe between this upcoming move and the previous move, I might have spent 15 to 20 minutes, maybe more like 15 between both of them, just trying to sort of figure out, what move sequences do I have that basically force a trapping of the queen. And I saw this move f6, and I basically just thought, it's going to trap the queen. And my line of reasoning was it takes away the diagonal from the queen, and next I'm going to play something like rook f7. The only square that white's going to have to go to is queen to d6, and then I can play something like rook d7, and the queen should just be trapped. But as it turns out, this was essentially too much tunnel vision on my part, and this attempt at trapping the queen wasn't really going to work. And we'll get a feel for sort of why that is in the move sequences that are to come. I just wasn't appreciating other elements of the position. And instead, what I needed to do I needed to get out of this sort of tunnel vision of, hey, I can only trap the queen, and sort of look around on the board for other ways to kind of build on my advantage, which at this point was pretty sizable. I think before this move, f6, I think I was something like -2 or something with black, so basically an almost winning position. And again, this is all because there isn't a super obvious way to trap the queen. So I mentioned some of my thoughts on how f6 would do that, but if you sort of analyze this position a little bit more, and I'll sort of leave that to you to do, just to not make this video too long, it becomes pretty complicated, the tactics, because it sort of rests on, hey, I'm threatening to trap the queen, and you've got to make sure that white has, of the plethora of moves that they can engage in, not least of which is counterattacking my queen with moves like f5, etc. Are there forced sequences in every line that lead to trapping white's queen? It's really complicated. It's not obvious, and when you have a really complicated series of or a bit of analysis like that, it's likely to be wrong. And so I should have been like, okay, I don't see an obvious way to trap the queen. What else is there? And I have to admit, I did not sort of have that mindset. And I think being open to that mindset in the future is something I'm going to try to do better. So as an example, instead of just going down this road of trying to trap the queen, I could have got active with my own queen and sort of resigned myself to the idea that white's queen is probably going to get back on the dark squares along the h4 d8 diagonal, but hey, I can do other things in the meantime. So queen d3, rook e1, defending the e3 pawn, rook fe8, getting the king, or getting the queen out of there, queen h4, queen c2, attacking the b pawn, knight c3, taking on b2, taking on d5, knight d3, gaining a tempo on white's rook, rook f1, bishop takes, queen e2, king h1, or rook c2. So in this position, which is a position we could have gotten to, I'm still down a pawn, but look at my piece activity. Like this is amazing. Like this is basically winning for black. And I could have gotten something like this had I not been so like zoned in on, I've got to trap white's queen no matter what. So with this move f6, I gave away those sorts of possibilities of, just improving my position and getting, in a best case scenario to something like this where I've got super active pieces and I'm just winning. But again, continue to try to trap the queen. In this position, essentially gave away all my advantage, and this is pretty equal. And we'll get a feel for why that is. So black captures on f6, and I recapture on f6, trying to hold the e5 square, again with this idea of trapping the queen. The knight is controlling e4 and e6. The pawn's controlling e5. I'm really just trying to do everything I can to take away all of the queen's squares. And here is white's plan, which I did not see, to try to mitigate my attempts at winning a whole bunch of material. And probably the reason I didn't see this was it starts with this move knight c3. It starts with basically developing a piece which is really far away from the action. So knight c3, I play rook f7 with the idea of, again, just trying to trap the queen, holding on to the bishop. Of course, the knight's holding the bishop, but in some variation. So here, if the knight takes and I want to recapture, the queen doesn't have a7 as an escape square. Turns out here, rook c to d8 could have been a decent move as well, just sort of adding some support to the d5 square. But rook f7 was perfectly fine in the position. And now here it looks like white plays what looks to be a very natural move. So they take the pawn, and more importantly, they make it that I cannot take their queen, because if rook takes e7, knight takes e7, forking king and queen essentially wins in exchange. They win my rook, I'll end up taking their knight. That's no good for me. So instead of this knight takes d5 move, a better move for them would have been something like queen to d6. I'll play rook d7, just going after their queen. They'll counterattack my queen. I'll take theirs. They'll take mine. I'll take their pawn. They'll come in on b5. I'll get my rook out of the attack. They'll take a pawn. I'll attack their rook. So in this position, again, white is up a pawn. White's got a pretty nice advantage here. This was the sort of thing white could have had they not been, just overtly materialistic. But instead they played this move, knight takes d5. So instead of essentially having a pretty clear advantage themselves, this knight takes d5 gives me a pretty clear advantage. And here I needed to find a move like king g7, a relatively slow move in the position, where again we've won 4 or 5 moves. I'm trying to trap white's queen. I feel like I'm close. It's a hard move to find. I mean, I know I need to get out of this potential fork from the knight, but probably I disregarded this kind of move simply because it just seemed really slow, and I was probably just like, yeah, that can't work. But here's this sort of line showing what could happen. So queen d6, rook d7, takes on f6, takes on f6, knight takes, and king takes. And hey, look at this. I finally won this sort of material that I've been trying to secure this whole time. Now, in this variation, white has got 3 pawns for the material, but it's still, pretty decent for black. This is a pretty clear advantage for black, like minus 1.2, minus 1.3 for black, given the activity of their pieces, the activity of their king. Yeah, you would much rather have black in this position, even though it's not quite winning yet. But instead of this move, knight takes d5 happened on the board, and I think I might have spent like 10-15 seconds in a 30-minute or a 60-minute game where I had probably 25 to 30 minutes left on my clock. So I had more than enough time. And I just said, okay, well, this knight protects the queen. If I get rid of the knight, I get to take the queen. And I don't know if my analysis was any more than that. And in retrospect, that's pretty awful and inexcusable. So I got rid of the knight, right? And this is just losing. So we go from a situation where I've got a pretty solid advantage, which can end up with, after this king g7 move, can end up in this kind of position. Pretty solid advantage there, to just blundering away everything. So bishop takes d5. Yeah, just a total mental error. And if you don't see the solution for white here, go ahead and pause your video and try to figure it out. But yeah, as soon as I played bishop takes d5, I think I was like, oh my gosh, why did I do that? Because white has this move, right? And it's a pretty obvious move. No idea. I knew that white was going to recapture, but the notion that my rook was going to be pinned was not something that occurred to me in the 15 seconds or so of analysis that I did. So yeah, mental blockages and a lot of seesawing in the middle game. I think a really interesting element or thing to notice with this middle game is just to kind of look at the report. So this is chess.com's report of the middle game itself, or sorry, of the entire game. And if you haven't really looked at this report before, basically the way that it works is the horizontal line going across from left to right is basically, if the graph is at the horizontal line, then it's pretty even. If the graph is above the line, then white is winning, and if the graph is below the line, then black is winning. And how far above or below signifies how much either side is winning. So the opening basically ended around this area. And I think this typifies a lot of the games that I play, at least. You get an opening stage of about 10 to 15 moves, and nothing really interesting happens from the perspective of the advantage shifting from one side or the other. But then we get here to this part of the game, and this was where I played that move bishop g5 instead of playing g5. Bishop g5 throws away a lot of advantage. And I was lucky when black came in and played queen takes c7. I got to try to trap their queen. I get into this position where I got all this advantage, and I keep trying to trap the queen, and I play f6, and I just throw the advantage away. We get some back and forth, and then I had this opportunity after black plays knight takes d5 to go in for that king g7 move, and I take 15 seconds, and I just blow the game away. So I think what this game, and in particular how we can see it graphically shows, is that tactics are so important for people at my level and people at a lower rating level for sure. I think a lot of us, when we study chess, we're kind of attracted to the opening because it feels like, hey, this is something we can latch on to. But when you're looking at the opening, you're looking at something where not a lot of advantage is shifting. But if you get really good at tactics and you get really good at middle game plans and ideas, you have the opportunity to get these kind of advantage shifts that you can take advantage of and hopefully not throw back because of bad play, mental mistakes, whatever it might be. So I think a lot for people at my level and for people at lower rating levels, a lot more of our focus should be on the middle game and tactical play and making sure we shore all that up, because that's where a lot of our opportunities are going to be, namely our opportunities to win games when the advantage shifts to us, and opportunities to not blow games, when you're deciding between different moves and realizing how one move might be bad and is something that you want to disregard. So yeah, I hope you guys got something out of that. It was a relatively short game. I thought it was really instructive in that it typifies, I think, a lot of play that you see kind of at my level, and definitely at lower rating levels. And again, this is from a computer that's supposedly playing at a pretty strong strength of somewhere around 1900. Again, I don't know how accurate that is, but it's a pretty strong setting. If you want to get a feel for it, go get the app yourself and give it a try. They're not sponsored or anything, but yeah, just to get a feel, you might want to go ahead and do that yourself. But yeah, if you guys got any comments, questions, any sort of bits of analysis yourself, let me know in the comments. And looking forward to having something up probably tomorrow. We'll see about either doing a rapid game or maybe another game like this. So yeah, we'll see you guys next time. Thanks.